Hi, and welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Ann Riddell. We have got a great show for you today. We have two writers stopping by the studio, and Linda Stacy is back with her always uncensored book reviews. We kick things off with Rebecca Bratspies, an author and professor at the CUNY School of Law. Her book, Naming Gotham, is full of the quirky and often unknown history behind many of New York's roads and places. Rebecca, thanks so much for coming in today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
So I think your book kind of answers questions that probably a lot of New Yorkers have wondered from time to time anyway. And if I understand correctly, the idea sort of came to you while you were sitting in traffic on the Major Deegan, is that right?
Yeah, so, everybody takes the Major Deegan, but no one has a clue who he was.
Right.
I used to just be sitting
Exactly.
there like, who is this guy? Because it was always traffic.
Right.
And so finally my family just was like, why don't you find out? So I did, and it turns out he's way less impressive than you might expect from someone who has such a major road named after him.
It's so interesting. And you call this book a labor of love. You wrote it during a difficult time in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on?
So my husband suffered a cardiac arrest a number of years ago and was in a coma for a month in ICU, and we just didn't know if he was going to survive or not. And I was by his side, and I couldn't really do my scholarship. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth, but I needed something to keep my brain occupied and keep me focused. And so I kept thinking back to all the time we spent stuck in traffic and how he was always like, you should find out who Major Deegan was.
Right.
So it was like a way to connect with him and to have something to do, and I should add that we were in Pittsburgh, so it was a way to sort of root myself back in New York where I wasn't, because he had been in Pittsburgh for a premiere of his music when it happened.
Oh my gosh, and how's he doing now?
He is doing really well. He is composing.
And he gave you these very cool earrings we were just talking about, which you have to mention.
Oh yeah, he did. So for Valentine's Day, he bought me the best present I've ever gotten, which is earrings of the cover of my book. And I love to wear them, and yeah, it's really special.
It's very clever. So getting back to some of the stories behind New York's places, I was very interested in the Bruckner story. So because that was a borough president, he was a borough president, and he was also, as you called him in the book, the soda pop king.
He was a corrupt borough president.
Okay.
He was one of Tammany Hall's sort of finest tools. But before he went into politics, he and his brother had started Bruckner Beverages, which was a soda company. Mm-hmm. And during Prohibition, he made a fortune. But at one point, about 1,000 children marched on Bronxborough Hall protesting because he was raising the price of his sodas. And they protested, demanding that it be lowered back to the original price.
I love that. So getting back to Major Deegan,
right.
which where all of this began, tell us that story.
So Major Deegan was a major during World War I, but he never served a day overseas. He spent his entire war experience here in New York building fortifications, which I just want to be clear, is important work. Mm-hmm. But it's not exactly the stuff of legend, the stuff that usually gets you a road named after.
Right, especially a road that massive. Right. We have to touch on LaGuardia Airport because most people know who LaGuardia Airport was named after, but there's a fun fact in the book about how the actual airport came to be.
Right, so LaGuardia as mayor obviously was quite a character, mm-hmm. and at one point he was on a flight that was booked as a flight to New York. And it landed in Newark, where there was an airport. And he refused to get off the plane because he had booked a trip to New York, and Newark was not New York, and damn it, they were gonna, can I say that online?
You can say that.
He was going to be taken to New York City. And eventually they got a private plane and flew him over to where LaGuardia is now. And that is the start of LaGuardia Airport. It was named after him while he was still alive, which doesn't happen very often, and was opposed by some of the elected officials in Queens.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to talk about the Holland Tunnel because it's such a fascinating story from an engineering perspective, and just generally. Clifford Holland was the engineer. That's who the tunnel is named after. But he did not actually live to see the tunnel open. Is that right?
That is right. He built tunnels all around New York City. A number of the subway tunnels that we still use today are his design. He was known as the chief mole, and he was constantly going up and down into the tunnel to inspect the work. And that is very dangerous. A lot of people died because they would get the bends from going down, and the pressure was so significant. And he had a weak heart, so he got between the changes in pressure all the time, going up and down, and the stress of the job, he got very ill, and he actually went to Kellogg's Sanatorium, of Kellogg's as in Kellogg's cornflakes. And he died there the day before they were going to tunnel through from the New Jersey side and the New York side. There was going to be this big celebration, which obviously they postponed and never really had because of his tragic death at the time. But he was apparently a brilliant engineer. The tunnels matched perfectly. They were off by like a millimeter, and that's it.
My goodness. And it was originally thought that it was going to be used for horse-drawn carriages, right?
Yeah, at the time that he designed it, you know, automobiles were just beginning their ascendancy. So the original design was going to be for pedestrians, bicyclists, horse-drawn carriages, and motor vehicles. By the time it was done, though, it was very clear that it was only going to be for motor vehicles.
You know, it's striking in the book that so many of our places are named after white men, with some notable exceptions, like Shirley Chisholm State Park. So tell us a little bit about that.
Shirley Chisholm State Park was the very first state park or significant piece of infrastructure here in New York that was named after a black woman. And she, of course, was fighting Shirley Chisholm, right? She was a congressional representative from Brooklyn. She was the first black woman to be elected to Congress, and she made waves from the moment she walked in the door. Fascinating woman. There are a couple books about her that are out right now. I had a great time writing a chapter about her. But the state park opened right before COVID, and it is a wonderful place. I highly encourage people to visit it.
What do you think, as an educator more broadly, the fact that so many places do tell the stories of white men says about us? And do you see that really significantly changing?
I think it tells us who is in charge of naming things and what was counted as history. Right? And the stories that were told to us about who we are. And I think that is changing. We're having a national reckoning right now about that very legacy. And it is, you know, difficult and painful, but really important.
Now, you are a professor at the CUNY School of Law, and I know that you focus on environmental justice. Did that play into the writing of this book in any way?
Yeah, it really did. I study New York City mostly. Not exclusively, but I spent a lot of my time thinking about environmental justice in New York City. And the roads in New York City are an environmental injustice story. The story of the way the Cross Bronx Expressway, the Bruckner Expressway, the Sheridan Expressway were forced through neighborhoods in the Bronx, the way the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway was sited in thriving immigrant communities in Queens, right? That is the heart of an environmental injustice story about who is going to be dislocated, who's going to be exposed to noise and pollution, and who gets to benefit from that.
It's interesting. Just a last question for you, Rebecca. What do you hope readers take away from this?
I hope readers take away from it the recognition that we are all actors in history, and together we build New York. And New York, you know, the people that things are named for are fascinating, really interesting, fascinating set of people, but it's an incomplete story. And we can tell a fuller, richer story that is not only more interesting, but has room for everybody, because together we make New York.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's such a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your coming by today.
It was really fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. We are going to take a very quick break, and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to Book It. Joining me now is author Miki Brammer. Her debut novel, The Collected Regrets of Clover, is about a young woman who works as a death doula, but has trouble figuring out her own life. Miki, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I was really fascinated by the concept of your book before I even read it. So your main character, Clover, is a death doula. Let's start there. Can you explain what a death doula does?
Yep, so a death doula is someone who helps usher people peacefully through the dying process. And it's an occupation that's been around for centuries or thousands of years, because when you think about it, you know, priests and doctors and nurses and hospice workers have done that role, but it's only just been recently that the name death doula, it's also called end-of-life doula, has become a little bit more popular. And I think with the past few years, we've all become much more conscious of death and the importance of those roles. The role has become even more important. And I think what's really interesting about their role is that it's often people who don't have anybody else that they sit with. So they're the only person to be with that dying person. And so it is quite a unique job.
Yeah. I read in an interview that you gave that you said that you had anxiety around death as a topic, and that is part of what drove you to this book. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And so ever since I was a kid, I've had anxiety around death. And I think a lot of that's because we don't really talk about it in Western society, and it's almost taboo, and that made it scarier for me. But I've always been someone who, when I'm scared of something, I make myself do it. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to get curious about this and immerse myself. And so I started attending lectures around New York City and talks, and there's things called death cafes, which I found there's one in the New York Public Library, which I went to.
And what is that, though, Mickey?
So a death cafe is, it's a meeting of usually strangers, and there's a moderator, and just everybody sits around and discusses different things relating to the topic of death and mortality. And it was a Swiss sociologist, I believe, who started it, and he basically made them as kind of dinners and drinks where people would gather to talk about death and make it more openly, and it's become a phenomenon around the world. You can find them everywhere. There's plenty in New York City. I think there's online ones as well. So
just sort of normalizing the conversation, essentially.
Exactly.
So would you say that writing the book has changed your feelings about death? Is that anxiety lessened now?
Absolutely, yeah. It really made me delve into where that fear came from, why I felt it, and really address that. And just being able to talk about it. And when you're someone who's writing a book about death and people know that, they tend to talk to you about death. And
I bet they do.
Yeah, I've kind of, now it's something that I talk about a lot. And I think that took the fear away because it was normalizing it in a way. And that was a thing that I thought was so fascinating, that we don't talk about it in Western society, but it's the thing that we all have in common.
Sure, absolutely. So even though the book is about death and dying, it's also been described as uplifting and heartwarming, and it's kind of this part romance, part coming-of-age story. So tell us how the plot unfolds a bit.
She lives by herself in the West Village in New York City, in the apartment that was her grandpa's. She's a loner. She really kind of hasn't found a way to integrate into society. She's very content just as an introvert, being by herself, and the only people she really connects with are the dying people. And then she meets an old lady, one of her clients, who she's 87 years old, and she was a fabulous photojournalist in the 1950s, and she's very feisty and kind of really inspires Clover in talking about her life, but she also reveals her regrets, and that makes Clover look at her own life and consider what regrets she might have. Which is something she tends to do with her clients. She notes down their last words, which are often regrets, advice, and confessions, and she looks at her own life to see how she can learn from those. But she realizes that at 36 she does have a lot of regrets, and if she happened to die the next day, there would be a lot of things that she'd wish she'd done. And so it really makes her take a look at her life and think about what steps she can take. So it is a coming of age in that way.
There are a few lines in the book, a few moments that really stuck with me, particularly in the way that you describe grief as sort of a bag that you always carry but doesn't always weigh the same.
If you love someone, you're never going to stop missing them, and you're never going to stop grieving them. And I know when I've read books about grief, that is one of the things they talk about, how it's like a bag. So when it first happens, you might have it as the size of a suitcase, but then as you go through life, it changes shape, you learn how to deal with it, but you're always carrying it with you, even if it's the size of a small purse. You never put it down. And I think that's indicative of how much you loved someone. And I think what was really important to me to convey in this was that grief isn't something to be overcome. It's not something that you put a timeline on, and that everybody's grief is unique, and it's entirely up to them how they deal with it and in what timeline.
For many people, death is an uncomfortable topic. It's not something people necessarily want to examine. So were you at all worried about selling a book about death and dying, especially your debut novel?
Yeah, I was. I didn't really know much about publishing, but I just, even when I was writing it and I would tell friends what it was about, and people would always be like, oh, okay. And I'd be like, no, it's happy. It's an uplifting book. And they'd say, oh, okay. And then when it did come time to find an agent, there were agents who said, I can't sell death. And I think even with editors, some of them felt the same way. And I'd had the idea before the pandemic. And just so happened to sit down and write it during the pandemic. And I think it took on new meaning because of what was going on in the world. And I was writing it, in New York City in that time when we had hundreds of people dying a day, and there were the ambulances going past my window nonstop all day and night. And so that was a very interesting time to be writing a book about death when you have anxieties about death and you're surrounded basically by it happening in real time.
I mean, that is really quite a set of circumstances. Did you at any point in there say, I can't do this right now? Or did it actually make you more intent on going through the process?
I think it made me realize, because from my window I could see neighbors being stretchered out into ambulances, and actually through another window I could see a nursing home, and every night I'd be woken up by the, that classic vignette of the red lights through the window. And I'd look out and I'd see people being stretchered into ambulances, and I'm sure a lot of those people never returned. So I think it felt like I couldn't look away from it because it was happening in real time to these people and their family members. And I think it was important to bear witness to that. And I think that's what really helped me face my anxiety, because it is such a real part of life that we're all experiencing. And I really made myself dive into it and not try to avoid it, which I think a lot of people do.
Well, that's interesting, and that sort of leads to my next question, because in the book, Clover, again, your main character, she treats what she does sort of as a privilege. She feels it's an honor to sit with people in those days and moments as they transition from life to death. And she says in the book, what's most important is to not look away. So what did you mean by that more broadly?
Yeah, so I think as humans, especially with death, because it is scary, our instinct is to avoid it, because it reminds us of our own mortality. And I have a good friend who passed away a few years ago, and she had a terminal illness. And I remember her telling me that when she first found out and she told people, everybody's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and really cared for her. But gradually, because, it kind of was over the course of a year that she got sicker and sicker, people kind of dropped away and weren't checking on her. And I think it was because, first of all, they didn't know what to say to someone who was dying, but also it made them uncomfortable because it made them think, well, that could be me or that could be someone I loved, and their instinct was just to avoid it entirely. And I think that is a natural instinct, but what's amazing about death doulas or people who sit with family members when they're dying is that they, in spite of that feeling and that impulse, they have this privilege of being with someone, looking them in the eye and saying, I'm here for you in this moment, because it is a momentous thing that's happening.
Absolutely, absolutely it is. I want to talk a little bit about your background. You were raised in Tasmania, and I don't think I've ever met anyone from Tasmania before.
There's not many of us.
So what was that like for you? And yet you came to New York, and you were also an abroad student here in the States?
Yes, so when I was 17, I was a foreign exchange student in Lincoln, Nebraska, which was,
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, you just pick the country and then you get placed somewhere. And I'd never heard of Lincoln, Nebraska, but it was actually a great experience for me.
Just a last question for you about the book, Mickey. What do you hope readers take away from this? There's so many messages in it about life, even though the subject matter is largely about death.
Yeah, I tried to layer a few things in there so people can take what they need. I think different things will resonate with different people. I hope that people will take a look at their lives and think, what is my version of a beautiful life, and what steps could I take now to get closer to that? And also just to make the topic of death more open in our society, that we can talk about it, because I think the more we talk about it, especially with family members, about end-of-life wishes and things like that, it will make it easier when the time comes. It's never going to be easy, but I think the more we talk about it and the more open we are as a society, I think it will be much healthier and make it a little less scary.
Yeah. Lots to think about there. Thanks so much for all this time. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you.
And I enjoyed the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mickey. Next up, our regular segment, Uncensored, with award-winning columnist and author Linda Stacy. As always, she has plenty to say.
If reading about the bad marriages of dead writers interests you, then Lives of the Wives by Carmela Chiuraro is just the ticket. The book zeroes in on writers' wives, straight and gay, of the last century. These are women who were successful in their own right, but gave it up to tend slavishly for their writer spouses. The couples include people like British theater critic Kenneth Tynan and his American wife, writer Elaine Dundee. He was excited she was a writer until she had a best-selling book. This freaky writer liked to cane Dundee during sex and once left her on the floor with a broken nose and black eyes. Then there's Roald Dahl and his movie star wife, Patricia Neal. He was another disgusting creep. She didn't really love him anyway because she was obsessed with Gary Cooper. But when she had a massive stroke, Dahl was a tough taskmaster, making her exercise every single day. This was supposed to bolster up the author's premise that women who marry literary types are doomed. But under his tough training, she did recover. Then there's the lesbian it couple of the Victorian age, sculptor Lady Una Troubridge and author Radcliffe Hall, who wrote the classic same-sex novel, The Well of Loneliness. This couple seems to have been thrown into the mix just to prove that even in female relationships, the person who takes on the husband role is a bastard. Meantime, Troubridge, who took on the wife role, was a neglectful mother who hung her baby out the window in a muslin bag to dry her off after a bath. But hey, who cares? All that matters here is that Radcliffe wanted Troubridge to do all the domestic chores, and then she took another lover. Bizarrely, the book is often more about the reviews the writers got and their childhoods rather than their marriages. Just because Lives of the Wives is about dead literary types does not make it literature. However, literary in its own right is A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes, a comic turned, yes, mythologist. Yeah, you heard that right. A Thousand Ships refers to the Trojan War, but told in the voices of the witty, sly, clever women involved. And there are many, such as the vengeful goddesses who planned the Trojan War, as well as the ticked-off wives of mythic heroes. I absolutely love the voices of the wives who were supposed to hold down the fort, or in these cases, the kingdoms, while they waited decades for their philandering hero husbands to return. Included is the tale of the Amazon princess who fought Achilles. Legend has it he fell in love with her as he was stabbing her to death. Maybe Achilles should have made it into the Lives of the Wives. A Thousand Ships is about rape, abuse of power, adultery, sex trafficking, narcissistic cheating husbands, you know, all the stuff that no longer exists in our modern world. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stacy.
That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for being here. A quick reminder to check us out on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you, especially if you disagree with Linda. I'm Carol Ann Riddell. See you next time on Book It.